Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome presenter, Newsday, BBC World Service, Alan KASUJJA.
After you've heard about my panel, you'll applaud them much louder than you just applauded me. Thank you very much, by the way. And welcome to what should be a very fascinating discussion with extremely distinguished lady and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce you to Lord Holmes. He's a member of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. He's also a former Paralympian, and he's done a lot of great things. He's a lawyer, he's a thinker. In many ways, I think he's a revolutionary. Let's give him a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Next to him is a gentleman called Kim Samuel. Kim is president of the it's Rick Hansen. Kim, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You don't look anything like a gentleman. Rick Hansen is CEO of the Rick Hansen Foundation and a former Paralympian as well, and he's from Canada. Did you win anything for Canada?
Great to be here, thank you.
Yeah, he's an incredible man. You'll hear about the things that he's doing. And I'd also like to introduce you to Dallas OBERHOLZER, who is the founder and director of Indigo Youth Movement. When we were having a chat about what he does, I called him a rebel because he's a groundbreaker on so many levels, and he uses a skateboard. Am I right in saying that the skateboard on the African continent, for example, might be as revolutionary as the mobile phone?
I think the way people are interpreting and utilizing a skateboard and discovering its potential, I think it really is amazing to also put it on its own new context and see what might come out of it. It's the same way every day people are coming up with new apps. Skateboarding is such a revolutionary thing that it is developing every day, and the participants are creating it. That's what's so beautiful about skateboarding.
And we'll talk more about that. And ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to Kim. Kim Samuel. Kim will tell you many fascinating stories, and I'm going to start with her in a moment, because she's, amongst other things, she's a professor scholar at Oxford. Isn't that right, Kim?
Previously Oxford, now McGill.
Exactly. Previously Oxford, now McGill.
And also from Canada.
And she's also from Canada. And Kim is the president of the Samuel Family Foundation. And Kim, the thing that I like about what you do is your passion for isolation, social isolation. Many people will be hearing this for the first time. Could you just explain it?
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me here today. I am really passionate, not so much about social isolation, but how to combat social isolation. I got the idea, and I'll just mention very briefly how this came about. Many years ago, in 2002, I had the opportunity to meet Nelson Mandela, and I asked him about isolation. At that time, my father had died a couple of years earlier, having had a brain injury, a coma for 3 months, and then a pretty hard road for about 4 years. And he was brave and valiant, but I kept seeing around him and my mom as his main caregiver, I kept seeing this image of a figure sitting alone at the bottom of a well, and that started to become clear to me as an experience that had nothing to do with what had happened to him, but about the way people were perceiving him. And my mom, it was almost as if
How were they perceiving him?
Well, it was almost as if they were fading into the mist of their own lives. I would use the term less than, perceiving him as less than, because he wasn't able to walk. He was still able to run our business, but as he said, tell me what I can't do, for God's sake. I've spent my life building this. It was this feeling of less than, and almost a fear from other people, including friends that really wanted to still be friends, but they felt that somehow this was a new Ernie. This wasn't their friend Ernie. Anyway, I met Madiba in 2002, and I asked him about isolation, and he said he'd never been isolated, not even in Robben Island, because in Robben Island they were all brothers working together with a common purpose. He said, I was never alone, and went on to say to me that he had seen isolation in the child in the village in Africa with HIV/AIDS who no one would love or care for or feed or touch, and that he had seen isolation. It was very bad. And so for me, it just occurred to me that that's what I should be working on for the rest of my life.
And when we talk about isolation, Rick, You've traveled around the world. I wonder if it's actually true to say that people who have disabilities, who have challenges, like people who are in wheelchairs, for example, feel isolated.
Well, there's no question, Alan. People with disabilities around the world, and there's 1 billion people on this planet today with disabilities.
1 billion.
And of course, with aging baby boomers, the trend is more of the stories that Kim talks about her father, through a catastrophic injury or trauma, enter that field. And our perceptions and our attitudes about how we view disability and our preoccupation on the loss and the lack of versus the ability and the potential is one of the greatest isolating forces that we can imagine on this planet. And it's one of the things we have to attack with vigor and to counteract that with great stories. And what better story than right beside me here, having Sir Holmes, is an incredible Paralympic athlete, but also a great parliamentarian and doing great work.
Absolutely, and I'll come to him in a moment because the story is incredible. But just to belabor that, you talk about attacking it with vigor. What was the changing moment for you? What is the one incident you point to and say, this is it? That was the turning point for me.
Yeah, for me, it was the pain of dealing with your own circumstance, entering into this community and actually carrying with it my own stigma, my own prejudice about what it meant to have a disability. And recognizing...
Before the disability, you had a prejudice.
Absolutely, I did, because...
What was your perception of people with disabilities?
It was pity, lack of capacity, a less than whole life. And of course, that first beginning came to a place where you examine where your pain comes from, and it doesn't come from the lack of the ability to use your legs. It comes from the attitude you have about your circumstance, and then the preoccupation on loss instead of the inspiration about possibilities.
And, Lord Holmes, your achievements are crazy. You have won Olympic medals, you are a lawyer, you are a parliamentarian. You break the whole, you scatter the idea that disability actually has limitations. What is it that made you achieve all these things? How do you explain yourself to the world?
That's incredibly kind, Alan, but the reality is I just wrote all that stuff on Wikipedia. And the great thing these days, everybody has a handheld device, but nobody ever checks the facts.
What are the facts?
And I think firstly, worth saying, what an honor to share a platform with all of these guys, not least Rick, the man in motion, what he has done to change perceptions of disability globally. He truly is a legend. I'm merely learning in his
How has he affected you? How has he impacted you? How has Rick impacted your life?
There are so few disabled people who transcend the nation state, and what Rick did. He's had a pop record, he's had a rock record made in his name. Now, how many of us can say we've had a rock record made for us? That's cool. That's cool, man.
Would you like one?
I'd love a record. If somebody'd like to write a record about me, I'd love that.
Yeah.
But I've been incredibly fortunate. I think it was very kind of you in the introduction, Alan, to say that I'm a lawyer and a thinker, demonstrating that those two things don't necessarily always go together. And I guess I've been incredibly fortunate to have opportunities to work with great people, to go to 4 Paralympic Games, to win some lumps of tin in certain races, but equal to all of those was being asked to be one of the directors at London 2012 and to lead our plans to deliver potentially the greatest Olympic, but certainly the greatest Paralympic Games ever staged. I was lucky enough to lead the team that did that, to really not just challenge perceptions, but to try, if we could get all Olympic sponsors, also Paralympic sponsors, if we could drive broadcast deals around the world for the Paralympics, if we could sell out all the tickets. None of those things had ever been done before. If we could do all of that, I really believed that not only could we have a sensational summer of sport in 2012, but we could fundamentally shift attitudes towards and opportunities for disabled people across Britain, but rippling out right around the world.
And the question that was handed to me on this piece of paper is inclusion. Can sports lead in creating a more tolerant society? And I don't like the word tolerant. I'd like to say acceptance. Do you see the distinction I'm trying to make? Because I think tolerance suggests coexistence and not necessarily, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, we have similarities, we have differences, but we shall tolerate each other. Whereas acceptance suggests embracing and let's get along, let's get it on together. And I wonder if that is something that can be achieved
Inclusion,
using sports.
I think inclusion is incredibly important. I wish I'd brought the image with me. There was a great picture. When the Paralympic Games were in Vancouver in 2010, this lady sent us a picture from her street. And when the Olympics were on, all the kids in the street were playing ice hockey. When the Paralympics were on, they'd seen sledge hockey, and they got their skateboards, connecting to your man here, and they were in the street sitting on their skateboards, mimicking playing sledge hockey. That's the difference. That's how inclusion can drive change. And sport can't be the solution to everything, but it can play an incredibly fundamental role to changing attitudes.
I told
and
you these are
driving
great
inclusion.
people. Let's give them a round of applause. Great people indeed. Great perspective. Now, I'd like to bring in Dallas. Dallas, he talks about the skateboard. First of all, how did it all start for you? How did you decide that this was going to be what you did?
Growing up in South Africa, bringing Nelson Mandela back into the room, it's always good to acknowledge the ancestors, and I'm sure that they're here with us.
Yeah.
So skateboarding was very tabooed, wasn't accepted 15, 20 years ago. When I was at school, I would actually get corporal punishment for saying to the rugby coach, no, I'm going skateboarding on the weekend. I mean, it was not allowed, skateboarding. So I kind of set out to make skateboarding socially acceptable and create a good story around skateboarding and social inclusion.
So what was your first action? How did you do it?
My first action was taking this toy and saying to children who would otherwise not have the chance to have a ride on a skateboard, and the attraction is it's right there.
But I actually specifically want you to tell me about you going into the heartland of Zulu, of the Zulu community and changing attitudes there. Tell me about that story. Tell me that story again.
It really is a matter of joy, and anything that brings joy and anything that the children there could do that would make them feel like they are normal. Whereas they'd be making shift play and playing on rocks and jumping in the river, when they could step on a vehicle that could push them, that could make their heart race. It was as simple as the excitement of stepping on a skateboard that got such an attraction amongst the youth. And then it was a sense of community in the Zulu village where it was time to say to everyone, hey guys, it's time we build a facility. And that collective collaboration and that DIY kind of attitude in skateboarding that brought the community together to say, let's build a facility that we can all be proud of and that can attract people and that we can then be part of society and become part of the skateboarding family.
And do you see a connection with Rick?
Well, we both roll on wheels, and we were mentioning just earlier how I've seen paraplegic guys on skateboards holding skateboards on the front and back and jumping and flicking the skateboard and even participating in World Cup events, and how skateboarders are so accommodating to anyone who can find their own way of riding a skateboard.
And how do you see this working? How do you see a collaboration between you two? What sort of conversation would you have with Dallas, Rick, as far as making the wheelchair, bringing the wheelchair and the skateboard together?
Yeah, well, the nice thing about collaboration is that when you share stories and you become familiar with each other, you can start to synergize. And actually, I have some friends who have a spinal cord injury, and they're spread all over the world. And after their injury, they wanted to return to the skateboarding life. And so rather than just adapt the chair, they actually then went out onto the skateboard parks, and they learned especially how to actually do the flips. And so they use the park. They're not on the skateboard, but they're in their wheelchair, and they're just being included and accepted just like anyone else. And that in itself is building relationships and breaking down barriers and creating a great social fabric. And so I'd love to continue to create that synergy, because the more we share these great experiences, the more we can connect people and have them lead a normal life.
And I can see Kim nodding, and she'd like to be part of that conversation. What would you like to bring to the table?
I first wanted to comment about what you said about tolerance, and it just struck me. Tolerance, to me, it kind of goes along with that expression, live and let live. and that can be can be a word that leads to looking away or not paying attention and not being engaged. So I love that you brought that up. This is
Yeah, I
about
had a very interesting discussion with the Rabbi Rob, and we were discussing that, and that's how it came in.
yeah.
But I'm
I know
very
you're
curious.
interviewing me. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's great.
I'm very involved and have been for probably almost 2 decades with Special Olympics because I see Special Olympics as it's sport. It's centered on sport, and I don't think I need to explain about what the value of sport is because we were here and we've been hearing this for a couple of days. But I'm a big fan of sport as a pathway, as one of the key pathways to bringing about change and bringing down barriers. And in the case of Special Olympics, beginning even when there's a child that's newborn that has a diagnosis of an intellectual disability, I think that the sooner that Special Olympics can be part of the community for those parents, that no one will feel like they're sitting alone at the bottom of the well. In terms of collaborating, I'm really I'm open to anything that we can do. Thrilled to meet both of you, and I think perhaps we can come up with sharing stories as the beginning and sharing each other's stories.
Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Interesting discussion there. And Lord Holmes, she makes an interesting point about as soon as possible, as soon as, from the time they're children. You see that there might be a future here that's a bit difficult for the children, but you want to hand them an opportunity as soon as possible. I come from Africa, where the existential realities can sort of blind or can basically take away they can cause, you're trying to survive, and you have very little resources, and as a result, how do you then make sure that you share the little that exists with the children? How do you make, because sadly the stigma begins as soon as possible. The parents are stigmatized for having a child with disabilities. The child themselves is stigmatized right from the moment they're born. So how do you break that? Given your experience, how do you deal with that?
I think, like so many things in life, it comes down to leadership, and that's right from the top.
Where?
Right from the top, and then at every level. So everybody appreciating that they have a leadership role to play, whatever the issue is, because as you rightly identify, as soon as something becomes a stigma, a problem, you're already then having to do something which is more difficult than it otherwise would be, as opposed to getting it right from the outset. Look how much money, be it in countries that are strapped for resource, be it in some of the richest nations on the planet, look how much of that resource, look how much of that policy goes into trying to put right something that didn't need to go wrong in the first place. Let's look to the beginning of journeys. Let's look to the start points. Let's look to possibility and inclusion at that point. And if there's that investment, nations will be richer economically, richer socially, but crucially they'll be richer morally, spiritually, and on every measure you wanted to take.
Okay, I'd like to open up this discussion to you. I'm sure there'll be people with burning questions. If you'd like to ask anything, please feel free to raise your hand, and there'll be microphones brought to you wherever you are. Is there someone? Do I see someone over there? Yes? There are lots of hands going up at the moment. Do you have a microphone over there? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Tim Raybolt from George Washington University, and my question is, we talk so much about diversity and inclusion, but we never talk about mental health and addiction, especially in the sports world. And I just want to know what we need to do to kind of start decreasing the stigma around that, because it affects such a high percentage of athletes and individuals throughout the whole country. But the mentality seems to be, okay, if you do have a problem, let's get you to treatment and keep it real quiet and not talk about it, and then drop you right back where you were and hope things go all right. So the question is just kind of why is that the case, and what do we kind of have to do to overcome that obstacle?
Kim, would you like to take that on?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I lived in Washington, D.C. for about about 14 years, and I think if that's the perception wherever you are, and at GW or anywhere else, then I think that we need to call that out, because that shouldn't. I think you would agree that's not the right perception. I don't know why it is that throughout the world, as Rick pointed out, people with disabilities are often seen as less than incorrect perception, and we're calling that out. I don't know why it is that people with intellectual disabilities, at least in my travels and experiences, and also in involvement in organizations like Human Rights Watch, I see that the stigma is much higher, and as a result, somehow it seems more acceptable. Not that it should be acceptable anywhere to treat someone or tolerate someone and not let them achieve their full potential.
So does the solution lie in policy, or does it lie in social?
Well,
in a
I
shift
just
in the
wanted to
social
come
dynamics?
back to, and I think you're to building on that, to your question. I think is about mental illness as opposed to mental well-being. Is that right? Okay. And I've gotten involved through Human Rights Watch in that issue where, for example, there are many thousands of people that are still shackled in the world because they have a mental illness, and that's something that I'm fighting to stop along with others. The why is it okay is, I think that our lesser than best parts of our human nature come out, and I think it's the parts that come from fear. So I think in order to provide solutions, you were starting about policy, yes at the policy level, yes at the community level, and yes at the level with everybody that you encounter, who sometimes you don't even know is the person feeling like they're sitting alone at the bottom of the well.
Rick, would you like to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, there's no question. That's one of the great things about sport. Everyone comes together with a common set of rules of engagement, a common language, and a common outcome about how you're doing. And the notion of mental health is not being a disability is ridiculous. It is, and it should be part of the understanding of the term of disability, so that we can actually fight the greatest disease in our community, which is the absolute fragmentation based on clinical diagnosis, body part, organization that represents a piece of a person, and flip it around and say, look, we're all here to support people, and this is a massive group of people in our society, and to normalize it so that we recognize that whether you have a physical challenge, whether you have a mental issue, it's okay, and we need to deal with attitudes, awareness, and barriers.
And when it comes to normalizing things, Dallas, you've had some experience with that with your skateboard. I'm fascinated by it. Trying to make it look, to normalize it. What do you do in a society that still has all these hang-ups? How do you make sure that the normalization process begins?
Well, I think the beauty of playing sport is beyond communication, and many of the places we would work is different language barriers, and just seeing people get together on a basis of playing, not judging who's the best, but acknowledging everyone's skills. Just that encouragement that comes on the playing field, or in the skateboard park, or in the streets outside. It's just a matter of acknowledging everyone's skills and everyone's contribution towards the activity of skateboarding, and it's totally all-inclusive, and everyone has their bit to contribute towards the activity of skateboarding.
Lord Holmes?
Completely, Aaron, but don't want to add anything at this point. Let's get another question up.
Let's get another question up. There's a question right at the front. Could we have a microphone at the very front, please? Yeah. Thank you very much. What's your question, sir?
Hi, my question is really a question, and I just want to say it's a privilege to hear you all this morning. I think one of the main things that I've found over the years is that there are a lot of say no to thing campaigns, right? There are a lot of negative campaigns about racism, sexism, disabilities. I think one of the most important things that we have to recognize is that it's about time we become more positive about diversity, about embracing diversity, not just on the sports field, which I think is a very important thing. There are a lot of different games, a lot of different sports where everybody plays a part, size, shape, no matter what. And it happens at the corporation level as well. where different mindsets, different viewpoints create different products and services. So I think really what we need to do is to make sure that we stop saying no to things and we start saying yes to diversity. We start to embrace that and recognize everybody's ability to contribute. I love what you said about the difference between tolerance and acceptance, because I think tolerance is a word that kind of suggests that somebody may be lesser than you, even though they may be different to you. We just accept who we are as human beings.
Let's give a round of applause to Dominic. Dominic.
Thank you very much.
Dominic, by the way, is a world leading agent, and he's an agent for KAFU, who's sitting right next to him. Let's give another round of applause to KAFU. KAFU. I'm wearing a badge from KAFU's organization that talks about embracing what KAFU, for those who don't know who KAFU is, 148 caps for the Brazilian football team, 4 World Cups, 3 consecutive finals, and 2 championships. So let's give him a round of applause. That's in soccer. I have about 25 seconds, and I wish to give a few seconds to each of you to share your final thoughts. And starting again with you, Kim. What are your final thoughts, especially around policy, around isolation, and around making sure that integration takes place? Again, building on what Dom just said.
Actually, what you just said are all things that I support. I just add one point that I wanted to add is that I've heard a lot through the first days of Special Olympics and also here about the importance of what you can do if only you believe in yourself. I just want to leave everyone with this idea. What about the person who doesn't believe in themselves yet? How do we get them to the start line in sport and the start line through life? And I think that's a pathway that could add to this dialogue as well.
Thank you very much, Dallas.
I'd say society needs more informal gatherings of sport and not so much, we could just have more communal spaces for much the way skateboarding is unstructured activity and the way that it doesn't need a coach and it needs to be accepted, skateboarding on the streets. But I think sport just needs to be out there. Like I saw the guys playing ping pong tables, standing around actually off the table. I think sport should just be spread around everywhere, and it shouldn't be on that time with the coach. It should be a thing that's just between walking from here to the next building. It should be continuous, playing sport.
Great, that's a brilliant statement. And Rick, what would you like to say as we finalize?
Well, I think we need to actually ramp up the power of media and in our corporate community to really create an amazing awareness campaign to change attitudes and to normalize this issue. We can do that in a huge way, and then we need to back it up and measure it so that we're not in a subjective soup. And I think we can also bring our academics together and to start creating a clear index on how we're progressing to get to that goal.
And Lord Holmes.
Nothing can be achieved individually. There's no such thing as individual success. There's only shared achievement. So connect, collaborate, and champion whatever you're trying to achieve and make it a reality.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for my very Kim Samuel, President of the Samuel Foundation, Rick Hansen Foundation CEO, Dallas OBERHOLZER, Founder and Director of Indigo Youth Movement in South Africa, and Lord Holmes, who is a bit of everything. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.